Hi, and welcome to the Planet Driven Brands podcast. In this show, we will be discussing with our guests how brands they represent can help in the drive to build a better, more sustainable and safer planet. We will highlight brands as drivers for change and the role they play as influencers. How will brands positively impact the planet and its environment? This is what we're going to find out. Do brands actually have any responsibility to change? The Planet Driven Brands podcast, episode 26. Today's guest is Claire Smith, vegan entrepreneur and impact investor. Today we're going to be talking about the sustainable, cruelty-free, ethical economy. Hi Claire, thanks very much for coming on our show. I wonder if you could give us a short introduction.
Sure. Okay, so I'm Claire Smith, and I've been a financial industry professional since mid-1980s. I've been involved particularly in the vegan investing sphere for the last 5 years, and that's something that I moved into latterly in my career because of personal convictions. I've created companies since that time, principally 2 investment companies and 1 networking platform, which also is supplying investment services to companies and investors.
You mentioned just then that you started on this journey specifically 5 years ago. I guess your journey into veganism probably started before that. And I think it'd be interesting for everybody to hear how you got to where you are now.
The veganism aspect of it predates my shift in terms of my professional career. And in fact, initially vegetarianism started in the late 1970s for me when I was still a teenager. And I became aware of the increasing animal cruelty, particularly because intensive factory farming was becoming more prevalent. As such, I wanted to avoid harming animals. And I felt this was the best way to avoid harming animals was by not consuming the products that came from animals, because then no animal would be harmed. And then in the mid to late 1990s, I became more interested in veganism. After a certain amount of research, I found that it was both healthy and obviously better for the animals which are used still in dairy products and obviously in the egg industry. Coincidentally, at around the same time, I actually had a baby and she turned out to be milk intolerant. So that, led me to research more about, the difficulties that people have, consuming milk. And I became convinced that it is actually quite a harmful product. Essentially, that conviction in terms of the veganism, my convictions also in terms of the environment, it became harder and harder to continue in my role in the traditional asset management industry because I was being confronted, I won't say on a daily basis, but frequently with dilemmas whereby I would encounter trading firms, investment firms that I was having to deal with as an investment consultant that were doing things that were bad for the planet. So this dilemma and this tension between my personal convictions, my concern for the environment, and my desire to do more with my own money, trying to find investment products that I would want to invest in, finding that there were none, that created this germ of an idea that there was a demand for these investment products.
How hard has it been? I mean, how much pushback were you getting? People must have been pushing quite hard against you.
Yes, I mean, I think you were just treated like, somebody who was really sort of stupid or naive within the financial industry. Way back in the 1990s, I was in a bank and that bank actually was brought a bond issue to market for a coal company in South Africa. And I remember being very uncomfortable with that. And I was, having to go around with the management, who were talking to the investors, and they were, expanding about, their business strategy and obviously producing more and more coal. And I was like, I really don't want to be here. And I could not promote, clearly that was going to negatively impact my prospects within the company. And certainly in the investment sphere as well, I would say in the sort of 2000 to 2010 area, and even later, there was still this very strong perception that by trying to impose any kind of moral framework on investing or ethical framework, you would be cutting yourself off from returns from certain activities, and that would have a damaging effect on the returns. Fortunately, in the last 10 years, there's been quite a lot of research out which disproves that. So that isn't something that we really have to deal with anymore. But what that actually meant was that I had to create my own firm because nobody else was doing it. It wasn't as if I could go to another entity and say, oh, can I join your vegan investing team? Because there really wasn't one. And the level of interest, I mean, at that time, a lot has happened in the last few years, to the extent that it's now being taken seriously, and people can see that there is something to it in terms of the shift in consumption, in terms of the focus on sustainability and how much more sustainable it is as a means of production of food versus animal products. But at that time, people did look at me a little bit as if I was barking mad. And so, even the idea of trying to introduce that as a concept into an existing kind of ethical or responsible investing firm seemed a bit of a slim hope. If you're vegan, then you care about the animals. And you care about the animals, not just the ones that are being exploited, but you obviously care about biodiversity and the animals in the wild who are being hurt by the land use, which is, required in order to feed all the factory farmed animals. Yeah. But equally, if you care about all about animals, then I think you care about humans too, which is why we exclude weapons and defense, and consider things like human rights abuses within the large cap portfolios. So it really turns into a kind of a consideration for others, a respect for others type of philosophy. Whether they be humans or animals, large or small.
So I wonder if you could tell us about, I'm calling it the Beyond Group. I don't know if that's right, because there are plenty of branches to it. I just wonder if you could describe it to us.
Yes, essentially, my hopes to really extend this brand in many directions have really coalesced around my core competence, I suppose, on the sort of finance and investment side, and a technology platform which is intended to link all of these aspects together, the investment, but also the people and the companies involved in this arena. A movement depends, I think, on two key things. One is people, and two is resources. Mm-hmm. And by resources in our society and our economy, really that means access to money in order to fund what needs to happen. And what needs to happen is that the companies that are creating products which are removing the use of animals need to grow. They need to become more prevalent in order to have a bigger impact. They need to grow in terms of their revenues. The more they grow in revenues, the less meat is being sold, frankly.
How can you help, or is it really your job at Beyond to try and help those wayward brands that are now trying to get within and bring themselves back into this sort of sphere?
In terms of the brands that I invest in, and obviously brands coming to the platform to fundraise, there needs to be obviously the kind of veganism needs to be at the core, and a kind of ethical way of doing business, sustainable way of doing business. But these are startups, and they're already coming to the platform with these ideas in mind. I think the people that you're talking about is more the established companies that are kind of looking out into the market and saying, hang on a minute, we had a business in this area making, this or that product, and now we're losing market share to these companies. And how are they managing to get traction? Because, we're huge. We've got all these resources. We've got this huge marketing spend. We're advertising on the telly every night. Why is it that we're losing market share to these startup brands? And it is because of the way that these brands are marketing themselves and how they are able to speak to the consumer and say, we are doing something different. We have these values at our core. We would not be doing this if we didn't think that we were doing something positive for the planet, positive for animals or health or whatever. And that's a very powerful message, which possibly only a startup or a small company can make, because it's so much easier for them to be authentic. If you're a large company and something is going wrong in one of your brands, and that gets out into the market, so let's say, bottled water, and you're stealing it from a lake, and selling it to higher price or whatever, there's all sorts of examples within the consumer sphere of how companies may be doing something unsustainably. If people know about that and it's affecting one of the brands, then they're actually going to look at the back of the product and say, oh, XYZ company was doing this, so I'm not going to buy any product from that company. So this is why I think we are seeing some of the big food brands really move more into this space. You could call it greenwashing, but I think they're desperate to have some kind of sustainability credentials and have some brands, some newer brands within their portfolio that they can point to and say, look, we're investing in this, we're trying to do the right thing. Yeah. But they do need to be a lot faster in terms of dealing with issues in their existing brands and migrating away from these negative activities, because as I said, it can affect the whole business. It's interesting how these companies that do negative things, they know that they do. And so they desperately try and seek out something that they can do with a small amount of money that's going to give them the biggest kudos. Yeah. Like sponsoring, like you say, sponsoring some, health initiative or whatever.
What's the future of meat?
Okay, I'm going to break it down because meat means different things.
Yes.
So meat can mean kind of animal tissue, let's say.
Of course. Yeah.
And the animal tissue can be synthesized in two ways. You can do this, the cultivated meat, which is taking animal tissue at its source, but a tiny amount, and it doesn't need to necessarily keep going back to animals. In order to do that, as in a very, very small amount can be grown and can perpetually be grown without going back to animals, depending on the techniques that you use. Yes. So if that is perceived to be a product by people, then in the future, it will be possible to obtain that without the use of animals. There's other techniques as well, such as the precision fermentation, which is actually generating specific protein molecules, which are used in specific processes, like, for example, the proteins which are in egg whites. And so an egg white can be synthesized by mixing together those proteins with water, effectively. And so those things can be replaced. So that is the future of meat, is by basically breaking it down into individual kind of use cases and places where a product which is derived from an animal is used or consumed, and saying, how do we create that particular thing, but do it a different way? Yeah. But then it goes beyond that. And you say, oh, but this is what we historically got from an animal. And we use that because it was kind of convenient to get it from an animal. But now that we have this biotechnology, can we create better proteins? Can we create better formulations? Can we synthesize other things? So can we take algae, for example, which is what fish eat? Why do you think fish are perceived to be so healthy? It's because they eat algae. Why don't we eat algae? Yeah. Because it's green and it tastes bitter. The fish don't seem to mind it, but we do. How do you transform that algae into something that is appealing to humans? So this is then where you get into the functional food and the future food, and basically better, higher quality food than we've maybe had in the past, possibly tastier as well. So I actually see the future not just being about replacing animal proteins, but basically but improving the quality and sustainability of food enormously through the application of these techniques. If there's anything people want to hear more or find out about what we're doing, we are constantly streaming out through social media on the Beyond Investing channel, the Beyond Animal channels. And the other thing is our website for the Beyond Cruelty Foundation. We want to move beyond cruelty. We don't want that to exist anymore. That website is launching with our campaigns for cleaner, kinder, healthier world and for no cruelty to animals.
Your passion is apparent, and that comes over so well in the whole of this chat. It's been really, 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 really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for being friendly and being interested to hear about what we're doing.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. Again, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, great speaking.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. The Planet Driven Brands podcast is the brainchild and copyright of Nick Jones and is broadcast in partnership with theplanetsagency.com. Planets Agency is a partnership of consultants and communications experts. We build planet-driven brands. During the series of shows, we'll be hearing from more experts, and we would love for you to be involved. please do comment or come back to us with questions. We'll be happy to engage. If you wish to be notified when our episodes are broadcast, please subscribe on the website. If you'd like to be part of the show, we'd love to hear from you. We look forward to many more entertaining episodes. Thanks again for listening.